Let's look at some of the new editing functionality found within Cubase Pro 12, which can really speed up and enhance our workflows. The scroll bars have been brightened and enlarged so that they're easier to see and easier to use. There's additional nudging functionality that can be accessed from the nudge toolbar. And generally, when we nudge events, we nudge them based on divisions of the primary time display. So if I'm in bars and beats, I can nudge by whole note, half note, quarter note, or if I am in seconds, I could nudge by 1, 10, 100, or 1000 milliseconds. Now we may run into situations where my primary time display format, I want to be in bars and beats, but I may want to nudge in milliseconds. So now we could come to the nudge settings and I could choose a different time format for nudging. So I could say I want to nudge in seconds, and this will decouple the nudging from the primary time display. So I can now nudge based on milliseconds when my primary time display is set to bars and beats. There's some enhancements with the range selection. So in previous versions, when I have a range selected, I can nudge the start of the range to the left or the start to the right with keyboard shortcuts. I could nudge the end to the left or the end to the right with keyboard shortcuts. Now there's some new functions that we could do where we can nudge the bottom up and down as well as the top up and down. So if I wanted to take this range and nudge the top up to include our tracks, top down, or not nudge the bottom up or the bottom down, we could just trigger these different keyboard shortcuts directly from our control surface that's been mapped out or through keyboard shortcuts. Many people really appreciate the ability of doing slip editing, where we could hold down the Alt plus Control key or the Option plus Command key and slip the audio contents within the event. But if we wanted to do that through a control surface, it wasn't possible. But now we could just come right over here, we'll open up the key commands, and under the edit section, we'll have slip event content left and right that can be mapped to, again, key commands or control surfaces. So now I could slip the event to the left or to the right directly here from key commands and not only have to do it directly from the mouse. When we want to move events to the cursor, in previous versions, we could only move, when we go to move events to the cursor, it would only move the start of the event to the cursor. But now we have the option to also move the event ends to match up to the cursor. So we could do that, and it gives us a lot more flexibility, not only for parts on our project window, but we could also do this within our MIDI editor. So if I wanted to select all my parts and say move the start to the cursor, or if I have my cursor here, I could say move end to the cursor. When working in the MIDI key editor in full screen mode, many times composers will constantly be entering into cursor position manually to jump to a particular measure or SMPTE time code, and they see this window all the time. So in previous versions, when I would enter my value in and hit enter, this dialog box would stay open to indicate the position in time. To speed things up and make the workflow faster, we now can hit enter once, and as we hit enter once, it moves the play position and closes the window for us. So again, kind of speeding up different elements. Now as we move the playhead, there's different keyboard shortcuts that have been set up to move and nudge the playhead based on different intervals. So if we want to go to the key commands, previous versions, we could nudge the playhead by 1 bar or 1 frame in either direction, but now we could choose to nudge by 5, 10, or 20 seconds in either range. So if I wanted to go 5 seconds forward, 10 seconds back, 20 seconds forward, we could again assign key commands to do all of these different functions. Fades have been all consolidated into one submenu of the audio menu. So we wanted to look at our fades, we could come over here and we could see that we'll have different fades. Earlier versions, we could remove like all the fades. But now if we wanted to, on this part, if we wanted to remove the fade in but not the fade out or other way around, we could just go to our audio to fades And we could choose to just remove the fade out without adjusting the fade in. Many people adjust fades for a number of tracks, kind of just by grabbing the upper right-hand corner of the handle, and we could do a fade out. So let's say I wanted right from that point, all of the tracks to do a fade out. And many times we may listen to it and say, okay, I want to change the end position of the fade out so that the piece of audio stops right here. And as we would resize the events directly from the bottom right hand corner, we notice that the fade position also changes. Now if we hold down Command plus Option or Alt plus Control as we resize, the fade position is maintained. So we could truncate or trim the length of the event and still maintain the actual fade position. Crossfades have also been augmented with a new Crossfade Editor. So say if I have multiple parts here and I wanted to do a crossfade on all of these parts. So we can double click, and as we see, our Crossfade Editor gives a lot more flexibility and a lot more options. We could have, different types of fade ins and fade outs that will be independent. We could audition the fade out, the crossfade, or the fade in. But one of the most powerful things is this concept of chain mode. So most programs in previous versions of Cubase, when I adjusted this crossfade, and we look at the contents of this crossfade, so as soon as I edit this, we notice that the crossfade that may have been painfully set up right here to be perfect is now the audio event itself is moving and affecting whatever crossfades I had done. So if I'm doing classical music editing and maybe I have hundreds of crossfades on this particular track, I don't want an earlier crossfade edit to mess up all the different crossfades. So with the chaining mode, we could choose this chaining mode here, and we'll choose this until end. So as soon as that is selected, now as I adjust the crossfade, the other parts that follow afterwards will automatically keep their crossfade position so that they're not going to be messed up. When working with ARA, it can be tricky sometimes because a lot of times when we work with ARA and want to launch an ARA extension such as Spectral Layers, we run into situations where we would almost do it on an event by event basis. Now we have the option of, from the inspector, doing this on a track level. So when I come over here, we'll just load up our Spectral Layers. And now as we do this, every event that is on that particular track, when we double click to go into the sample editor, will automatically be loaded into the extension. Before there was confusion on when to render an ARA2 extension to the file. Where is it stored in a temporary version? Do I have to do a bounce selection? This has also been simplified by going to the Spectral Layers, and we could choose to make all of the track extensions permanent, or we could just choose to remove the particular extension from the track entirely. So much easier way to deal with multiple clips in an ARA editing situation. The sample editor has also had some enhancements, especially when working with different zoom factors. So if I double click, we could see our different sample editing, and we have different zoom functions. So we could have a global zoom so that when I double click, the events will be the same zoom value regardless of how long the event is. When we go into auto zoom to events, when I double click, I could see the full waveform in the sample editor if it's shorter or if it's longer. We can also have a clip-based zoom. So let's say I'm editing this part and I've zoomed in, and now when I come to this part, I may want a different zoom factor, but I go return to the part that I was editing that was zoomed in. Now that is automatically maintained. With the sample editor, we've also reorganized some of the different inspector options. So these will be a little clearer, and we'll have some little breakout windows for, especially in the hit point detection, for creating warp markers and other functions. Or if you don't want to see that, you can just simply hide it to see more inspector parameters. People wanted to have more precise automation. So if we go to our studio menu to studio setup and go to the audio system, we can now adjust the volume automation to be sample accurate. So usually this would default to 8 samples, but now we could go down to complete sample accuracy with automation. Many of our composers also work with video inside their Cubase project. And it's very common to have a video file that you start composing with, and then you get a picture change. So now in Cubase, we have the ability of having 2 separate distinct video tracks so that you could have the original video file and the edit of the new video file in the project so that you could use one as the reference. People will have hundreds and hundreds or sometimes even thousands of tracks in their project. So if we go to the studio menu, we can choose that we have 4 independent mixer views. So if I wanted to look at mixer view 1, I could have this for audio. I could have mixer 2 for inputs and outputs, mixer 3 for virtual instruments, mixer 4 for groups and effects. And all these different functions, we can have those different mixer views so that we could find exactly what components we need when we need them. So as you can see, a lot of incredible attention to details to speed up workflow. And those are some of the great new editing enhancements found within Cubase Pro 12.